Hello, I'm Kenan Proffitt for BlenderBranch.com and welcome to another tutorial. This tutorial is going to be a texture heavy tutorial. We're going to be doing a little bit of modeling, but mostly we're going to be focused on how to use multiple UV maps inside of Blender to add different textures, to layer different decals. We're going to actually even be making some custom decals right inside Blender and applying it to this TNT crate model. Now, if you frequent my channel for the visual effects tutorials, fear not. My very next tutorial will be a VFX one, so stay tuned for that. For now, let's jump inside Blender and start modeling this TNT crate. And for the first time in Blender Branch history, we're actually going to keep the default cube because that's going to be our base model. And you know what? We better just delete it and then bring it back just so that, we don't want to break tradition here. Okay, so here's our cube, and I'm going to hold down Control and then drag up to snap it to the bottom or the grid floor there. And this is going to be our object that we're going to texture up and make look like an awesome little TNT model here. But we have to do a little bit of modeling before we totally get to that point. So first of all, I'm going to duplicate this cube, just pressing Shift and D, and drag it over. And this is going to be our kind of the trim around the cube. So I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'll press Z for wireframe. I'm just going to scale along the y-axis. I see it's the green arrow here. I want to make this a narrow board. So I'm going to scale by pressing S, then Y. And just make this, we'll make it about half a Blender unit. You can kind of eyeball it there. We don't need to really be specific, unless you want to be specific. Just working in Blender units here. Okay, so the thickness is good. Now let's work on the height. So I'm going to go to the side view and press wireframe by pressing Z. I'll use B to box to grab this top layer of vertices and then just drag that down. And somewhere to make it look kind of like a 2x4. That's about good. That's 2 Blender units high. We're doing some really complex modeling here. Okay, so now we have the basic width. I want it to be a little bigger. Let's go with 3 Blender units. There we go. That's more like it. So now we have the general size of it, but we want to build this out like an actual crate. So it wouldn't do any good to just duplicate boards. I'm going to delete. Let's see. With this board selected right here, you see our cursor went up here to the middle of nowhere. That means anytime we try to translate, we would translate around a origin that is nowhere near the actual piece of geometry. So we need to reset the origin. To do that, simply right click to select the object, go over here. If this isn't pulled up, just press T to bring up that sidebar and set the origin to geometry, and that'll snap it to place and get it right where you want it. Now, as I was saying, we can't just duplicate these boards and, put them in place because no one would ever build a crate like that. You wouldn't just slap them on the edges. So let's think through how this thing would actually be built. And there would definitely be a small overhang for the pieces to kind of be nailed together to contain the actual box or the actual TNT. So what we're going to do is just drag this over so that it overhangs. There's a small little lip there, about half a Blender unit, like so. And that'll give us something to work with when we start adding these boards and building around. And then we want there to be a gap here that's big enough for one of these slats to go vertically. So to just kind of judge the size we need, let's go ahead and duplicate this by pressing Shift and D. And I'll grab that. I want to rotate it by 90 degrees, so I'll press R and then 90, and then just hit Enter or Return. And this just helps us line this up. Now we have a nice easy measurement here. I'm tabbing into edit mode. I can grab these vertices and just drag them over till it snaps right about there. Again, you don't have to be perfect with any of this because the trick to all of this is making it look like it's not perfect, like someone just nailed this crate together, just slapped it onto, get some explosives in the world. The world needs more explosives. So now let's delete this because we don't need it. That was just for measurement. And now we have this piece of board that we can actually work with and we know it'll be the right size and the shape, so we can duplicate it and, you know, take it up here and put it in place. But I'm going to pause right there, because normally when you want to model everything and then you want to go back and add textures to everything. Well, computer graphics, it's really important that you save time wherever you possibly can. And I know that I'm going to add textures to each of these, and I know I'm going to be duplicating this board 16 times, because 4 for each side. Because I'm going to be doing that, I don't want to have to go back and UV unwrap each individual mesh. So before I actually do any duplicating, I'm going to grab this and go ahead and UV unwrap it. So to UV unwrap it, this is basically a rectangle, but it's a cube. So we're going to just use the simple cube unwrap, or I shouldn't say the simple cube unwrap. The way you're supposed to unwrap a cube, we will apply to this. Now, if you don't know how to unwrap a cube, I can demonstrate with this big cube here. So let's go ahead and unwrap this first, since we're already unwrapping. So I'm just going to hide everything but this cube so that we can see what we're doing. To do that, just select the cube and press Shift and H. I'm going to tab into edit mode to do some unwrapping here. And I'm going to click this triangle right up here in the top right hand corner, split it and drag it over. Press T to get rid of that sidebar. And I'll just set this to our UV image editor. And you might be saying, well, can't I just press U and then choose cube projection? Well, you can, and you would get all the faces unwrapped, but there's clearly some faces that are overlapped, and you have no idea which face is what. So that's not really a good way to unwrap a cube, especially when you want to have control like we do over exactly where you place decals. And for instance, like the TNT text that we're going to map on there, you want to know exactly what face you're working with in relation to the cube. So a cube that's properly unwrapped, the faces over here in the UV image editor will look like a cross. So to do that, it's very easy. What you want to do is basically just leave one open face that doesn't have any cuts in it. So what I mean by that, I'm going to select this edge right here. In fact, let me go to edge selection mode, and I'm going to mark this as a seam. To do that, press Control E and mark seam. And now I'm going to do the same thing for this top one, Control E, mark seam, and this one, Control E, mark seam. And now what that does, Blender's going to say, okay, we're going to make a cut right here and try to cut out this cube and lay it out flat. Well, obviously there's not enough cuts here, because if you tried to do that, there'd be a lot of weird stretching going on, because there's not enough cuts to lay out this three-dimensional object flat, like a piece of paper, which is what we need to do. So we need to make more cuts. So we're going to, again, leave this front face open. That's just the easiest way of doing it. Whichever direction you're looking at it, leave that front face open, and do the same thing for this bottom back 3 edges. So I'm going to press Control E with that edge selected and mark seam. The back bottom edge, mark seam, and this side bottom edge, and mark seam. Now, if we press, with everything selected, just press A, select all the faces, and press U, you can see we get a lot of weird distortion, because Blender's trying to lay out this object flat, but you know, it cuts along here, and then this edge and this edge are all stuck together, so you get that weird, like, twisted distortion. So there needs to be some relief in the cuts. So all we have to do is select one vertical edge to cut it, to give that relief so that it lays out flat. So I'm going to press Control E on this back left edge and mark that seam, and that's all the seams we need to mark. You shouldn't have to mark any more than that. The top 3, and then one vertical edge, and then the bottom 3. And then Blender knows, okay, we're going to cut all these edges, and then you'll be able to see this face, this face, this face. You'll be able to lay them all out so that it actually looks like, you know, a paper, all the segments of a cube laid out flat like a piece of paper. So I'm going to press A to select all the faces, U, and unwrap, and boom, just like that, we have our nice perfect cross shape. And what's great about this is I'm going to tab out of wireframe mode there, and I can select each face here, and I know exactly where it is. I know that all these faces are going around the clock like so, and then I know that my top and bottom face are the kind of the arms of that cross here. So this is right here is going to be my top face, and this is going to be my bottom face, and these are all these faces. Okay, so that's how you know you've done a successful job at UV unwrapping the cube. And we're done with that. Now we can unwrap that piece of board that we did. So I'm going to bring that board back by pressing Alt and H. And there it is right there. And now we're going to do the exact same thing that we just did, but we can kind of go a little faster. So I'm going to press Shift H to hide everything but the board. Now, it's important before you actually unwrap this that you set the scale, and we already set the origin, so let's set the scale, because remember, this started off as a cube that was exactly the same size as our previous cube, and we want to make sure Blender knows that we have made some modeling adjustments and it's smaller and, yeah, just different. So to do that, to apply the scale, press Control A, and we'll just go ahead and do the rotation while we're at it, rotation and scale, and that applies it. You won't see any change, but believe me, it has been applied. Okay, now let's unwrap this bad boy, and we're going to do it the exact same way. I'm going to pretend this is my front face here. I'm going to grab this top edge, Control E, mark seam, the back edge, mark it, side edge, mark it. Remember, leaving this front face open, and then just do the same thing with these bottom edges, marking those seams, giving one vertical edge for relief, and there you go. Now we can press A, hit U, and unwrap it. And you can see it lays it out like a cross, which is great. That's perfect. Except that I happen to know the texture that we're going to put this on. We want this to look like kind of a 2x4. And you want, really, if the wood grain on this face and this face, if it's going a different direction from the front face, it'll just look weird. So even though we haven't applied any textures here, we want to go ahead and rotate these faces so that they are in line with all the other faces. So with this top and bottom face selected, over here in the UV image editor, I'm just going to press R and rotate that by 90 degrees. And we can move it up here a little. Now when you select everything, you can see that these faces are all going the same direction. And that just gives it a little more realism. Okay. Now this face right here and this face, they can go a different direction if you'd like. So we can rotate those by 90 degrees. And there you go. All right, that may not have made much sense because we don't have any textures in here to actually show what I'm talking about. But later on, when we actually get to applying the textures, you'll see what I mean. I just wanted to get the UV unwrapping out of the way so that we can get on with the modeling of this object. So I'm going to bring everything back by pressing Alt and H. And now I can go ahead and duplicate this board. So I'm going to press Shift D and drag it up. And I like going into wireframe just so I can see where I'm snapping it to. And that should be good. You only want one side to hang over, by the way, because each, if there was a kind of a small hangover on each side, then none of the edges would meet, obviously. So you want to make sure this is flush with the box. So now I'm going to duplicate this again by pressing Shift and D, and I'm going to rotate it by 90 degrees, so R90, and then put it in position here. Like so. Now it won't be the exact same because there will be a small overhang here, but that's easy to fix because of this. Remember, it's the exact same size as this board, and this board had that overhang, so it's not going to be the dimensions of the cube. So you'll have to adjust this just by grabbing those, dragging it up, and making it fit. Nothing complex at all. And now let's go ahead and apply the scale of this, because you might not notice it, but if I bring back my image editor here, the UVs on this are going to be a little bit stretched because we changed the proportion of the model. So what I have to do, I'm going to press, in object mode, I'm going to press Control A, apply the rotation of this and scale, and I'm going to unwrap it again. And we'll just repeat the same process of grabbing these faces and rotating them by 90 degrees so that they're all going the same direction once again. And that's just so we can get that wood grain texture all going the right way later on. All right, now that that's done, we don't have to do any more major modeling. And we can just duplicate these boards all around the cube till our heart's content. So there we go. That's in position. And let's go ahead and apply, just so you know, it's hard to kind of see what's going on here. Let's apply some blank material slots to all of our objects so that we can see what we're doing. So I'm going to grab this cube. I'm going to come over here to the materials. I'll hit new and call this base box. And underneath settings, let's change the viewport color to kind of a reddish brown, like so. And let's grab these outer, the outer trim here. Let's apply a new material to that. We'll call this trim and set the viewport color to a brown. That's good. And if you want to apply this material to all these other objects, it's really easy to do that. Just select all the objects by holding down Shift and right clicking, and then select the object that has the material you want to apply to everything else last. You want to make sure you select it last, and then press Control and L, and you'll be able to any of this information that you want applied. For instance, for us right now, we want to link the material. Just hit material, and boom, everything changes to that exact same material. Nice and easy like. Okay, now we can see a little bit better inside our viewport where the cube ends and where our trim begins. And so now I'm going to select all 4 of these boards right here. I'll go to top view, and I'm in orthographic mode, and I just got there by pressing 5. And I'm going to duplicate these. So I'm going to press Shift and D, duplicate them, move it over to the side, rotate it by 90 degrees so that it's even with this. So R and 90. And then we can just move it in so that it clicks. And now here's a little, just kind of, you can leave it like this, but if I were building this crate, I wouldn't have these 2 seams right by each other. I would kind of offset everything so that this long side would meet up with this right here, just so that you know, there's some continuity with the structure. So I'm going to rotate this by 180 degrees, flip it around there, and this just makes it look more realistic. You know, if you build it how it would actually be built, not that I go around building TNT crates, but I could if I wanted to. Okay, now that makes it look a little more realistic. Boom. All right, now I'll just keep doing the same thing. Very easy. No major modeling here. I'm going to duplicate this, drag it over to the other side, and same story here. I'm going to rotate this by 180 degrees just so that those seams don't match up. And you want to make sure you don't have any unnecessary intersecting going on. It's important to get close, but yeah, intersection is never a good thing. Well, I say never. There have been times where it's been done on purpose in computer graphics, such as when Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story 2 in the video game sequence, probably just the best animated moments of animation history. But in the video game sequence, when Rex is playing the video game and Buzz Lightyear enters the Zurg's lair and he finds the source of Zurg's power, and it's a battery, but it's actually just a hologram because they wanted to be like Star Wars and have holograms everywhere. And Buzz Lightyear's hand intersects that battery. So there you go. You can get away with it in some places. All right, we have all those slats nicely put around our crate, and hey, it's looking pretty good, looking like a crate. All right, now we can get into the fun parts, which is adding the actual textures and the different decals and everything to texture this bad boy up. So this is really kind of the meat of the tutorial. How do we get this to look like realistic wood, and like there's some grunge, and then some title, what do you call it, stamps, like a TNT stamp or paint on there, which we're going to create inside of Blender. I'll show you how to do that. So first of all, we need that base material. So let's get right into that. I'm going to select this cube that we've already given a material, named it base box. And we know we're going to use an image texture. So I'm going to select this little dropper right here. and choose image texture, and we're going to open up an image texture, and you can download the texture, this wood texture right here from blenderbranch.com. I'll have the link in the description of this video, and also if you're watching on Blender Branch, it'll be in the description of that. But it's just from my website. You can download this wood color. It's just a basic wood texture. And if you download it, it does come with a displacement, normal, occlusion, and spec map. We're just, for this tutorial, we're just going to be worried about the normal, specularity, and diffuse. So grab the diffuse, which is labeled color, and open that image up. And if we want to go to the rendered viewport mode, you can come down here, or I'm sorry, right here where it has this solid shading, change it to rendered. Shortcut for that, by the way, is Shift and Z. And you should see, because we unwrapped everything, we have that wood material nicely applied. All right, so it's kind of hard to see what's going on here, so let's increase our light. And this isn't really a lighting tutorial, but we want to get some more light in here while we're texturing. So I'm just going to change our point light. We'll give this a size of 1 and set the strength to something like 300. And that just gets some more light in our scene for now while we're working with it. We'll go back later and add more. In fact, let me increase this. Go 500, just so we have a nice bright spot when we look through our camera, and then some shadows over here, and that'll help us when we're adding detail to our texture. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and add a ground plane. So I'm going to press Shift S, put my cursor to the very center of the scene. I'll press Shift A and add a plane, and I'll just scale that up. Oh, there we go. Now we kind of have something for that cube to sit on, and we can see some shadow. That just gives us some 3D placement, and I find it helps me whenever I'm texturing. Okay, so now that we have all of that set up, we have our base material in place for this cube. Let's jump into the node editor. So I'm going to split this window here. I'll zoom in like so. I'm going to press T to get rid of that sidebar. Let's give ourselves some space here, and I'm going to change this from the 3D view to the node editor. And you can see, because we used the sidebar right here to add the wood texture, Blender automatically plugged in that image texture to the diffuse. So we have that for free. And we wanted to start adding, first of all, some glossiness, because no object in the real world is 100% diffuse, which is what we have right now. It's just purely color. Every object has a little bit of glossiness to it. So we want to add some glossiness. So let's add a mix shader. I'm going to go Shift A, shader, and mix shader. And then I'm going to add a shader, glossy shader. Drag that into the bottom. And you can see currently there's far too much glossiness going on. It's reflecting way too much light, and it looks terrible. So we need something to determine which parts of this wood reflect light and which don't. And that's where a specularity map comes in. So to add the spec map, which if you download the texture from Blender Branch, you already get the specularity map with it. So to add that in, let's just press Shift A, go to Texture, Image Texture, and open the spec map, wood texture, and the specularity map looks like this. So it's just a black and white image. The white images will tell Blender where to reflect the light and give the glossiness. The black parts of the image tell it to absorb light and keep it diffuse. So open that up and take the color output into the fact of that mix shader, and that does just that. It says, all right, we want wherever those areas were white, we want that to be glossy and reflect light, and the dark areas to absorb it. And you can see that there's some glossiness in certain places of our cube and not much in others. So that's looking good. That's looking a little bit better. If you want to decrease or increase the amount of this, we can do so with a color ramp. So we're going to go Converter, Color Ramp, and drop that in. And you can see, dial in these sliders and you'll get more or less. So if you want to turn this glossiness down, you can select this white color and just drag it down, and you can see we're, getting rid of that little shine there, that little glimmer. And it all depends on your lighting too, how much light you want this to reflect. Oftentimes when you put this crate into a scene, or like my alleyway scene that I have there, you'll have to come back and adjust the amount of glossiness that you want, or the amount of specularity. But that's the spec map, already looking making our texture look better. Now we want to add a normal map. So I'm going to Shift A, go texture, and add image texture. Repeat the same process, just open up that normal map. And the normal map is this purpley looking one, and it has bump information. But you can't just take it and plug it straight into the normal input. You need a normal map so that Blender can read the information from that purple image. So I'm going to press Shift A, go vector, and not normal, not that, normal map. That's the one. And take the color output of that into the color of the normal map, and then take the output of the normal. We'll plug it into the diffuse and the glossy, and that gives some bump information to both of those. And you can see there we have a lot more detail coming through in our wood texture, a lot more bumps and bruises there. But it's far too much, and we want to make sure we don't have any color data coming through. So set this from color to non-color, and then you get more information, more bumps, and that makes it look a lot better. But like I said, it's far too much, so let's decrease the strength of it. I'm going to go something like 0.34, I think was I tried. Yeah. And again, this is something you can do to taste, depending on how much bumps you want in there. But that's looking good for our purposes. And that's kind of the basics of just kind of the base material, making a simple image texture look fairly realistic. Obviously, there's no grunge or anything, but that's a good start for a base material. Now that we've already put all of this together, we can save it, and we'll be able to copy it for our slats, the boards around here. So we'll be able to take this base material and copy it to those slats. So right now, if we make any changes to it, we won't necessarily be able to do that. So let's go ahead and copy this material. So I'm going to hit plus and grab our base box material, and all that did was just duplicate that material. But now if we hit this plus sign where it says add new material, I know it's kind of confusing, hit that, we can rename this and just name it wood material. So let's go ahead and apply that material to the slats here. So for this trim, we're actually not going to use this placement texture that we took the time to create. We're going to use the wood base texture. So just with one of these boards selected, come in here to the materials and select that wood material. And that changes this board to the wood material. And so by doing, we have that same viewport color. So let's go ahead and change the viewport color back to a brown, just so we can distinguish the difference here. And now we want to make sure that all these slats share this material. So we're going to do the same thing, just hold down Shift and right click to select all of these boards here. And you'll want to, again, make sure that the last board you select is the material that you want to copy to everything. So right click, select that, press Control L, and link the material. So now all these boards share that wood material. And we can get an idea of what that looks like if we press Shift and Z. So there you see that wood material has been applied to all of the outer slats here. Now, one thing you will notice is that for the vertical pieces, the wood grain is going the right direction. You know, it looks like a typical 2x4. But for the horizontal pieces, it's going straight up and down, and it does not look like that's one piece of wood. It looks, you know, weird. You don't really get 2x4s or slats like that are cut like that. Normally pieces of wood are cut with the grain. So all that means is that for these horizontal pieces, we have to rotate the UVs. Now that's good because currently all the UVs are in exactly the same position, because remember, we just duplicated that same board. Well, we don't want that, because that means that it's literally just a copy and paste of that same part of the wood grain. So if anyone's paying attention to your model, they're going to say, oh, this is obviously, you know, fake computer generated, because this is exactly the same as what's down here. So since we're going to go ahead and rotate these UVs, we can move it all over our UV image editor here, and that'll give us a different mapping of that wood texture. So with the render view mode enabled here, I want to add some more light to our scene. So I'm going to go to the top view, and let's duplicate this light, give it a nice backlight here, change this to a sun, just so we have some separation there from the background. You want this strength to be about a 1 because it's a sunlight. Now I'm going to duplicate this to the other side of the cube as kind of a fill light. I'll set this to 300. And I'll increase this to about a 600 just to get some more light in there. There, now we can see what we're doing a little bit better. So, where were we? The UVs for this board. Yes. So for this, I'm going to enable rendered mode, and I'm going to rotate the UVs in our UV image editor. So I'm going to press R and 90 just to rotate all of them because I like the position they're in. I just wanted to rotate them by 90 degrees. And now we have the wood grain going in the proper direction like so. So we're just going to do that to all the horizontal boards, R and 90. But here you see we have the same problem. This is an exact mapping of what's up here. So just press G to grab and you can move that off, and now we have something different. Aha! Difference is key. Variety is the spice to CG graphics. So let's keep doing the same process. Just rotate it by 90 degrees for all these slats that are going horizontally. R and 90 and move it around just so there's some variation. And sometimes, you don't have to move it much because any movement will be different or make it look different anyway. So just keep repeating the process, rotating those UVs, and I think we got them all. Yep. And you can do the same things for the vertical ones. Technically those are all sharing the same patch of that wood texture. So you'll want to move those around too. And it's just one of those things, you try to save time for yourself by laying out the UVs ahead of time, but then you have duplicates of everything. So, is it really saving time? I don't know. Depends on what you like doing more. Do you like unwrapping, UV unwrapping everything? That's not really my favorite, so I prefer to just do it once and then go back and make adjustments as needed. All right, now we should have something that looks like this. The wood texture applied to everything, but it all looks completely identical. So we want there to be some differentiation. Well, now that we have the base wood texture applied, we can go back and make some changes accordingly. So I'm going to select this box here, and yeah, selected. I'll change this back to our node editor. And now we can get into the fun stuff, the part of really making this crate look like an old beat up TNT crate. First of all, let's add some color. So remember, I have my base box material selected here. So any adjustments we do to this, it's not going to affect the outer trim, provided you did it properly and added just that wood base material to the outer trim. So now to add some color, what we want to do is in between the diffuse, so the image texture that's plugged into the diffuse, we can add a variety of nodes here. So we can add a color node. I'm going to use an RGB curves node and drop that in. And I'm going to pick the red channel here and just boost it up a bit so that we get some nice red in that wood. And you could go full out Angry Birds if you wanted to and paint it total red if you wanted. I just want there to be kind of a hint of red. Yeah, that looks good. Something that makes it look a little bit different. And I might add some contrast. I'm going to go just to the overall curves, boost this a bit, and down here on the dark ends, add a little bit of contrast there. Yeah, it's pretty good. Okay, so now we have some color in our scene, and if you wanted to further emphasize that, you could drop in a saturation node, and you can boost that. Like I said, go full Angry Birds with it, or you can desaturate it, kind of dull it, anything to make it look different from the base material. So this is, a pretty customizable way of texturing, which is how I like to do it. Make sure everything gives you the ability to tweak each individual aspect of the texture, and you'll get a more realistic result. Now we want to get to the fun part, and that is adding that TNT sort of mask or decal there. So what we're going to do is we're going to create that inside of Blender. Let's bring our camera to layer 2. So I'm going to grab this camera, press M and move it to our second layer. So I'm going to go here to our second layer, and I'll go to top view. I'm going to clear the rotation and scale of our camera. So to do that, press Alt R and Alt G. And I'm just going to drag our camera up, press 0 to look through it, number pad 0, and that'll have you looking straight down at your grid floor. Now we're going to do some fun things with the camera. You can see by default the lens over here, if you have the camera selected, it's going to be set to perspective, which is what you always want anytime. But for our purposes, creating a 2D decal, we're going to set it to orthographic, and that flattens everything out completely. And we're also going to come to the render settings, and where it's 1920 by 1080, we want this to just be 1080 by 1080 so that we have a perfect square. Because our cube is square, why not make our lives easier just by making the whole decal square? Now I'm going to press Shift-A and add in a text little thing here. And we're going to type in TNT. Just move this over and scale it up. Now, if you were to map that onto your model, well, you can do that if you want, but come on, that would look stupid. So we want to change the font of this. So over here in the text settings, where it has regular, let's change our font. And I'm going to use a font that I downloaded from defont.com, which is a really awesome font site where you can just download tons of free fonts. And the font I'm going to be using is called, if I can show you here, Army Rust. I don't know that I can link this specific font. If I can, I'll link it up, but I'll definitely link to font. You can just search for Army Rust as the font I'm going to use. You can use whatever you want, but this gives that nice military-esque type of style that we want, and that'll make a nice little emblem there to burn onto the side of our crate. So now let's just give this a simple black material. So I'm going to set the color of this to all the way black. And if we press Shift-Z, you can see if we were to render this out, we would get a gray background. Well, we definitely don't want that. We want the alpha channel. So let's come to the render settings and just select transparent down here at the bottom. And you really don't need any samples at all. So I'm going to put the samples down to 1 and set that to 100% and hit render. We'll redo that. There you go. Okay, so I rendered out really quickly, you see, because we just had samples at 1. So I'm going to save this out. So save image as, and I'll choose where I want it and just name it TNT decal and save that. And I'm going to escape out of the render, Shift Z to get out of the rendered mode. And while we're here, let's go ahead and scale this down and let's type explosives. Or you can do danger or stay back, or do whatever you want. It's just giving you an example of how we can map a couple different decals onto one object. So explosives, there you go. Let's render that out. I'm going to save this image as, save that, and escape out. Okay, so now we have, you can see this is what our camera looks like when we change it to orthographic, just completely flat, and gives us the ability to make some nice 2D graphics inside Blender. So while we're here, let's change this back to perspective, and let's put our resolution back to 1920 by 1080 because we'll need to do that later on for rendering. Let's go ahead and delete the camera and the text. We don't need those anymore. And jump back to layer 1 where we have our cube. Okay, so to map that TNT texture, let's grab our cube here. And we want to, let's see, I'll split this window, go back into the node editor. So to get there, let's go ahead and duplicate this image texture, Shift and D. And I'm going to hit this file here and open up our decal that we saved out. You can choose whichever one, explosives or TNT. I'm going to grab that TNT one here. And in order to get it to mix with our actual diffuse here, we have to press Shift A and add in a mix RGB curves. So drop that in, take the output of our TNT, and we're going to put it into the top of that mix RGB. And if we press Shift Z over here, you may not see much going on, and that is because we need to take the alpha information of that TNT and plug it into the factor of that mix. And you can see there we have our nice TNT texture mapped on there, but it looks dreadful. We had the channel switched here. So take the color output, plug it into the bottom of that mix RGB, and that fixes that. But you can see it's, how do we have control over where it's mapped? Because now it's just trying to put it everywhere on the UVs that our wood texture is, because it's sharing the same UVs for this object. So all these UVs, it's trying to map that TNT texture in all the same places. So what we need to do is create a new UV map for where we want the TNT. So to do that, let's come over here to this object tab, and I'm inside the UV image editor. I'm going to go ahead and load in that TNT decal so we can see what we're doing here. And under here, underneath UV maps, let's, with our object selected, I'm going to press new and call this TNT with caps. And now what I can do is grab this face right here, because I know I want this to have the TNT logo, and I'm going to press U and unwrap it. And now that changes that face to be the perimeter of our decal here. And if we press Shift and Z, you can see it did nothing. Well, why didn't it do anything? Well, that's because our material doesn't know that we just created a new UV map. It thinks that we're still using the original map. So what we have to do is tell it which UV map to use. So let's go back into the node editor, and where we have our TNT image texture, right before this, I'm going to press Shift A and add in an input attribute node. And I'm going to name this the name of that proper UV map, which is TNT. Now this is case sensitive, so it has to be just exactly how it's put here. So don't make it anything complicated. T underscore super not Nova T. You'll have to type that exactly how it is right here. So now that we put that vector information, plug that into the vector of the TNT decal, we should see, boom, it's mapped perfectly. And now we can jump back into the UV image editor and press tab to select this face of this map, and we have control over the scale of this, and it won't change the wood grain of that. It shouldn't change anything about the base material. We're just using it to plug that information into the attribute node into this TNT image texture. So this is great because this gives us tons of control over the different shapes and sizes of decals you want to add here. So I'm going to map that TNT. Boom. Now you might say, well, I still have all this extra stuff going on with the rest of the cube. Well, that's because if we press A, all of these faces here, we created a whole new map, so they're still trying to map parts of that image. So all you have to do is grab a face that has a bit of that T, and if you wanted to say, say TNT right here, just hit U and unwrap it, and that'll fill the UV space, and you can adjust it accordingly however you want, big or little. By the way, if you scale it way up and you see that it's tiling, you might like that. That's up to you. But if you don't like that, just simply go into the node editor. Sorry, getting things mixed up here. And where it says repeat, change that to clip, and that'll stop it from repeating all over the place. And you can, duplicate it, set it however you want. Put it up in the corner if you want. That's your thing. It's all up to you. Again, this is all meant to just be extremely customizable. And let's do the same thing. Actually, for this one, I don't want TNT to be on there, so I'm just going to move that face over to the side, and that gets rid of that. And for this one, I'm going to do the same thing, just because I want to put explosives on the sides of it, make it look cool. So while we're at it, let's go ahead and do that. Let's add a separate map for the explosives. So I'm going to, under UV maps, type in explosives, and I'm going to load in our explosives decal. Let's do that in the node editor. So I'm going to jump into the node editor, and everything we did to get this TNT node in there, we're going to just keep, like I said, moving left to right on our base material here. We're going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to duplicate the image texture, Shift and D. I'll duplicate the attribute node, Shift and D. And then I'll duplicate the mix RGB. Let's get this stuff out of the way. So mix RGB, Shift D, duplicate it, just like so. And hopefully you're not getting too confused here with all the nodes, but we're just repeating our same process here. So we have our original wood texture color image here, and then the mix RGB, which has our TNT texture plugged into it. And then we have this second image texture that we're going to plug into this, and we'll choose the explosives decal, this one right here. Add that. And now in this attribute node, let's take away TNT and type in explosives. Remember, it has to match exactly how it's written over here. Take the vector of that into the vector of the image texture, and let's see what that looks like. And you don't see anything, you got to take the alpha information, plug it into the factor of that. Oh, we didn't unwrap it. That's what we need to do. So come into the UV image editor, and let's unwrap this face. So I'm going to press U and unwrap, and let's load in that explosives decal. And there you can see it's upside down, so no worries. Let's just press R, rotate it around, and you can adjust how big or how little you want that. I want it kind of mapped like so. You can see we're really making this crate look awesome. For this face, I don't want it to have anything, so I'm just going to move it off because that has our TNT. But I do want it for this face, so I'll press U and unwrap and scale it up. Make it look like it was painted on there by someone who has a desire to watch the world burn. All right. There we go. Now they're kind of offset. TNT, explosives, TNT, explosives. Yeah, that's how we want it. All right. Now I do want to adjust the look of, you don't want it to just be this perfect black texture that's mapped on there. So you can do a lot of different things. You can change, working with the TNT thing here. You can set this to add or to, let's see, dodge doesn't really do anything. Burn. Burn gives a nice, kind of, I don't know, burn effect, which I kind of like. But I want to make it a little transparent so that it looks like it was painted on there. So let's press Shift A and drop in a color ramp node at that alpha. And we can squeeze this down, take the white value, and you can see that's making it look like it's sort of burnt on there. You can set this back to mix, and it'll bring back just the black color. You can kind of fade it like so. You want to make it look like it was really painted on there, faded. Make it look like it's part of the wood. I'm going to do the same thing with the explosives. I'm just going to add in a converter color ramp node to the alpha section, to the alpha channel. And I'll take the white value, bring it down a bit, clamping in on that like so. And this one I will set to burn just to give some variation. So now I'm going to try to make that one a little more transparent. Like so. All right. That's pretty cool. That just gives some variation, breaks it up a bit, makes it look like, yeah, like it's been there a while. And again, this is all completely to taste. There's a lot of different ways you can split this texture up, make it look different, make it look your own. Okay. So now that that's done, what we need to do is add some decal to the overall texture. So we have a lot going on here. We can kind of, I don't want to group these together because I want to make sure you can come back and make changes later on by looking at this node setup here. But really, if you break it down, there's not too much going on. It just looks like it is. There's a TNT decal, the explosive decal, and now we're going to add essentially just another decal, which will be some leaking grunge onto the box, because this is an old beat up TNT texture. You want to make sure there's some wear and tear to it. So I'm going to press Shift A, add a color mix RGB into there. So now I'm going to add another image texture. So I'm going to duplicate this one, Shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to open up one of my textures you can download from my site, this decal leaking. Open that up and plug it into the bottom of that mix RGB, and the same story, take the alpha on top, and you can see we just get this texture kind of awkwardly mapped over the whole thing. And that works, but I really want control over where it is. So we're going to do the same thing and create a new UV map. So I'm going to jump into the UV image editor. Oh, hello. And I'm going to add, just name this one Decal. And I'm going to unwrap the individual faces that I want there to be that grunge. So I'm going to load in this grunge so we can see what we're doing here. And I'll press U and unwrap. And you can see, obviously, we don't have anything going on because we have to do the same story. Back inside our node editor, let's duplicate this attribute node, Shift and D. And I'm going to type in decal and put the vector information in there. And now on that face, we have it exactly mapped where we want it here. So I can move this face down and change where that grunge is sort of leaking. I can adjust the scale depending on how much or how little I want. And you can see by covering up the text a little bit, you can adjust where it covers up. That, again, you have to work to read it. It makes it feel like this is older. We're really dirtying up this box. And that's, the secret to computer graphics, making anything look realistic, is dirt and grunge, because nothing in the real world is completely shiny and perfect. You want to make sure you get in there and add the dirt. So now that we have that going on, we can adjust, again, how much or how little we want of this by dropping in, you guessed it, a color ramp node. And I love these color ramp nodes. I don't like them because they kind of get in the way on your node editor, but man, they're really powerful. So drop that in the alpha section, and I want a little less of this. Not too much because I like the way it looks, but yeah, there you go. And if you say I want there to be some color to it, you can definitely add in a color RGB curves, and say you want you want it to be kind of like a green moss growing on there. You can boost the green channel and get a little bit of that in there as well. I'm just going to delete that for now for our purposes. Just want to let you know how easy it is to customize the color of that grunge texture. So even though it looks kind of like a concrete grunge, you can adjust it and make it look like it's just kind of algae or dirt or anything you want, really. Okay, so now we have that face with the grunge. Let's go ahead and do the same thing to make sure that these other faces are mapped properly. So I'm going to press U and unwrap that one, and adjust the scale. I don't like the way that looks, so I'm going to grab this up, reposition it. You can pick where you want to position that grunge. Do the same thing for this face. I'll press U and unwrap. And it tries to fit it to the rectangle, which distorts the actual texture in 3D space. So to get it back to a square, just press S and scale along the x-axis. And you can scale that back into a square texture here. This one's upside down, so I want to rotate it. I'll hold down Control to snap it. And I'm going to scale this, move it around, decide where I want it. That looks pretty good. And now this back face, again, U, unwrap, S and X to bring back that square. I'll rotate this around like so. And I kind of like how much it's covering up there. That looks pretty cool. Okay. Now I might go back into my node editor and just adjust the value here. Make it so it's not quite as prominent. There we go. You want there to be a nice gradual fade. And what's really cool too, you can add kind of some fake shading if you want there to be kind of a bump here. Hit plus on the color ramp and drag these values together, and you can see that creates some contrast there, making it look like there's actual dirt. It sort of gives some fake shading. Makes it look like it's sort of protruding off of that wood. There we go. All right, very nice. That is coming along very nicely. That base wood texture is looking good. I'm going to turn down the red saturation because I think the whole thing is a little too red. So I'm going to come over here, do that. There we go. That's a little better. Okay. All right, now you can go ahead and apply kind of all the same techniques to, let's see, let's get some grunge here on this top face. Yeah, some grunge on here. I'm going to press U, unwrap that, S and X. I'm just going to kind of find a spot where I can get some of that grunge on the corner there. There we go. Yep, very nice. Okay, now you can definitely do the same sort of technique to this material here for these boards. I'm not going to take the time to show you how to do all that, but you'll definitely want to add some decal to these boards as well. For now, I'll show you how to add, just kind of fake the idea of adding some dirt. Let's jump into the node editor. And with this board selected with our wood material, you can see we have just our base material. Now there's nothing really done to this. So let's add a little bit of dirt to this. And you can certainly do everything we did, add multiple UV maps to make it look like there's some grunge and dirt. I'm going to show you how to, just for the sake of time, how to kind of trick an easy way of getting a little bit of extra dirt in there and splitting up the color of all these slats of boards. So yeah, since this is a very texture heavy tutorial, I want to give as many possible texture tips here. For the color, first of all, we want to kind of break up the color. The box, it's okay that everything's the same value because, you know, you expect it to be. Each of these individual slats, you know, it comes from a different piece of wood, you know, theoretically. So you want to break up the color a bit. So to do that, let's press Shift A, add a color saturation node. I'm going to drop that in here. And I'm going to add in an input, an object info node right here. So an easy way of adding some randomness to kind of the color is taking the random output and just plug that into the value. And you can see it turns them all different values, but it goes a little too dark. So let's cut this in half just by adding in a math node. I'm just going to search for that and drop that in. And you can see now it's added by a value of 0.5. So you can take that down even further. Let's go 0.3, or no, I'm sorry, higher, 0.7. And now if you look closely, there's some different shades of wood here. So what this does is it takes a random value of whatever you plug it into, and any object that shares that material, it's going to break it up a little bit so that it's a little bit random. And that just helps to make it look like these boards aren't sharing the exact same material. Maybe they were cut from a different tree, and you get a little more randomness in there. Now to add a little bit of dirt to those boards, I'm going to use a noise texture. Again, you can do the decal thing with the UV maps, but I'm going to show you kind of a cheat, which is really easy to do. I'm going to press Shift A, color, mix RGB, take this bottom output and just change it to a black, almost all the way black. And you can add a little bit of color too if you want, like a green, like a blackish green. There we go. And obviously I don't want to overtop it the whole thing, so I'm going to have this determine, okay, which parts of this have that blackish green color and which parts keep our diffuse. And we're going to have the determiner be a noise texture. So I'm going to drop in a noise texture, take the factor into that. I'm going to set the scale to really low, about a 3. I'll set the detail all the way up. And you can see now there's a little more, there's just some greenish black kind of dirt mapped in proportion to the noise over top of our wood. And you can again use our good old color ramp node to kind of dial in these values. So, you know, if you bring these all the way together, you can see the look you get. The closer you bring this, the sharper that sort of edge is. And you can use this to create a lot of really cool effects with your texture. I'm just going to kind of use it pretty loosely to add a little bit of dirt, a little bit of soft spots to the overall texture. You don't really want to go too crazy because it's just kind of a procedural add-on there. If you make it look really, you know, sharp like that, chances are it's going to end up looking fake. So something like this, you don't want to overdo it. You want to add just kind of a few extra spots there. And if you increase the scale, you get different results as well. So I'm going to leave it as something about a 3 or a 2, because I find you kind of work with those bigger splotches all over, mapped all over. It doesn't look as repetitive, and it looks a little more beat up, a little more realistic. I'm still not super crazy about that red color in here, so I'm going to go back to my box, and it's just looking a little weird, so I'm going to try to increase the dark here. It's looking a little better. Let's add some contrast. Take the factor down of that. Might decrease the value, so I'm going to add in, again, then this is just making some personal preference changes here. Obviously you can adjust it however you want. I'm going to take down the value, and I might add some saturation so give it more of a burnt look. Let's go 1.1. Yeah, there we go. I'm liking that a little more. Anyway, it's all about, you know, how many different tweaks and little changes you want to make to your model to make it your own, make it look awesome, make it look like it's an actual beat up TNT crate there. But there's a lot of different elements that come together when you're texturing something like this. You want to make sure that there's not too much glossiness, you know, which I think I have a little too much. I'm going to take, come in here, I'm going to take the glossiness or the spec map, turn that down a bit for this outer trim. I can also turn the roughness up, so change it to like a 0.3. Makes it a little bit rougher, breaks up that specularity a bit, makes it look a little more realistic. Okay, now that's looking great. As far as the texturing, I know we kind of went really fast because there's a lot of different topics covered, but we used multiple UV maps over here in our UV maps, created a bunch of different UV maps to plug the information into an attribute node that's plugged into the vector of the individual texture nodes that we wanted to use, and that gives us free range to adjust where those decals are in proportion to our object, and we can adjust those materials individually. You know, we can adjust how much or how little we want, and the important thing is to keep your wood texture as the base. So we have our wood texture plugged into an RGB curves, some saturation going on. Everything up top here, all of this is all decal. So if I draw a box, this is all decal. If you look at it, really you just have the color texture going all the way to the output. And over here on the side, we have it mixed with a glossy node. We have some normal mapping going on for bumps. I might turn this up. I'll go 0.4. Yeah. But that's really it. That's the texturing. And then with the slats, I showed you how to do that nice procedural way to get some extra dirt and grime in there. And you can keep pressing these techniques to get more detail, get more little tweaks onto your model, make it look like it's been beat up even further. Now, the very final thing you'll want to do, obviously, I saved it for the last because I want to make sure we covered the texturing. But if you look at our model here, there's no nails, and that would be a dead giveaway if you were to complete this crate and not have any nails, because you definitely have some nails nailed into here. So let's model some nails really quickly. I'm going to press Shift A, add in a circle, rotate this along the x-axis, RX90, and scale that down. And it's just going to be a very simple circle here. Oh, hello, we don't want it in the middle of the cube. There we go. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, make sure we have the vertices selection mode enabled. And I'm just going to press E to extrude, grab that green arrow, extrude it out. I'll press S to scale, E to extrude again, and I'll E extrude again, this time scale way in. So we get a nice little point there. And then E extrude, grab the green arrow, and I'll go to top view so we can see what we're doing. Go into wireframe mode, and just because we want to sweat the details, let's make sure it goes all the way into the crate. And now just match it up. And you'll want to make sure that's probably a little too big of a nail. So I'll scale it down a bit. Pull it back out. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, so we want to close up this front face. So I'll grab this front layer of vertices by Option right clicking or Alt right clicking, and I'll press E to extrude, scale in, and then E extrude one more time, but this time I'm just going to press Alt M, merge at center. That merges those vertices at the center. You can pull it out so it catches some light, gives a little bit of fake shading there. That's good. Okay, and I'll smooth shade that. Now we have a nail. Pretty good. We can match it up there. And now it's a matter of, let's see, I'm going to add an edge split modifier on this just because I like sweating the details. I'm going to add modifier, edge split, just so there's a nice flat ridge there. Catches a little more sharp light. Now I'm going to duplicate this nail all over the place so that our crate has some nails. And what I'll do as I go is kind of scale it down and bump up the different edges. So I can grab these edges here. I'll turn on proportional editing, enable that. And if I spin my middle mouse wheel, I can decrease my circle of influence. And again, you want it to not look perfect. So chances are, in addition to jamming someone's thumb, nails are never nailed in perfectly. So you want to make sure you kind of mess up these models. Now, you don't want to duplicate too many without actually adding a material. So let's add a material for these nails. I'm going to add a simple material, call this nail. And let's just give this a gray. And now let's hop into the node editor and give this a simple glossy material. Oops. Node editor. So Shift A, shader. Where is it? Mix shader. Shader glossy, plug that in. And if we press Shift Z, you can see we have some nice glossiness going on here. Let's add a little bit of detail by adding a Fresnel node. Fresnel. And this tells basically the reflectivity. Actually, let's not use that. Let's use a layer weight node. I'm going to use layer weight. And I'm going to take the facing output, not the Fresnel, into the fact of that mix shader. And now the glossiness is a little more accurate to the edges of that nail. And that just helps it catch light and catch the shadows a little bit more. You can spend more time on that material, but really you don't have to. It's a small detail adding the nails, but it's a valuable one. You definitely make sure your crate has them. Now it's just a matter of duplicating these all over. So I'm going to scale those down. I think they're still a little too big. By the way, I duplicated this inside of object mode. That's why when I tab into object mode, they're all one piece. So I want to keep it like that because I want the nails to stay one object. So I'm just going to, the way you grab an individual set of vertices, you can box select all of that, or you can just select one vertice of that individual nail, press L, and that'll select all of them. And now you can Shift D to duplicate. Oh, if you get this where it doesn't feel like it's duplicating, it's because you have proportional editing enabled like I do. So disable that, and then you'll be able to adjust that group of vertices accordingly. So now it's just a matter, I'm just going to kind of breeze through this because I'm doing the same thing. Duplicating nails, put them all over your model wherever they actually would be if you were to build this thing out in real life. So that's all we're doing. Duplicating nails. Alright, so once you have all your nails in place and it looks the way you want it, one final little detail before we're all done, and that is beveling. Now, nothing in the real world is completely, I shouldn't say nothing, I'm sure there's something, but most things aren't completely 90 degrees flat like that. So, I mean, you'd cut your finger on that if you were to touch it. So, it's a small detail, but it adds a lot if you go through and bevel everything. So, I'm going to grab the base cube. We'll start with this. I can press Shift H to hide everything but the box. Come over here to the modifiers panel, add modifier, and I'll select bevel. And you can see it applies a fairly terrible looking bevel here. So let's decrease that by dragging down the width. And I want to use small increments, so I'll hold down shift, and that allows me to have more control. And again, you don't want it too smooth, but just smooth enough where it doesn't look like there's that sharp 90-degree angle. And I'm going to increase the segments to 3. Actually, I'll go 4. Yeah. And somewhere around there looks pretty good. Okay. Now I'll bring back the other boards, pressing Alt and H. And I'm going to grab this one, add modifier, bevel, and same thing, just kind of eyeball. You don't want it to be too much, but just enough where there's a little bit of roundness. There we go. And now we can apply this bevel to all the other boards if we simply, let me hide the middle one there. If we grab all of these boards and then select the one that has the bevel already last, holding down shift, right click to select, and then press Control L, apply modifiers. There. Now we applied a bevel to all of them. All right. Now we're done. We have our box. We have all our textures in place. We're ready to render this out as a test render. So I'm going to come into my render settings, and I'll bring back the transparent, uncheck that, and let's give it, we'll go 400 samples. Sounds good. Why not? And then hit render. And now if you did everything properly, you should see all those textures perfectly mapped onto your model. And again, this is all very customizable. You can create totally different results just depending on how much beat up of a look you want. And, you know, different things by tweaking things like the bevel, the normal maps, the different decals you add on there. You can really customize this. And hopefully you get an idea of just how easy it is to use multiple UV maps in Blender to texture a model up, creating some different results, different dirt and grunge. Remember, nothing in the real world is completely clean, so the goal is to make something not look CG in CG. So to do that, add dirt and grunge, and you got an awesome model that's scene ready for to be thrown in an animation or a scene. So that's it for this tutorial, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you in the next BlenderBranch.com tutorial.